Gabriel's Gospel Grace, changing lives and kingdom building one stone at a time.
Well, good morning to you, and welcome to another Motivational Monday. Now, the topic today, well, it could cause offence, because we're going to talk about offence. So, what is offence? What causes offence? We're in a world now where people seem to use it almost in every other sentence, that you shouldn't say this because it could offend people, or we can't say that because it does offend a certain group, or as part of a minority group, this would be offensive. But how does that affect us individually? What is offensive? What is offence? So for me, there are three characteristics, three properties of being offended. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. So first of all, when you think about what's said with regards to offence, people say, oh, you offended me. That's offensive to me. I've been offended. So the emphasis is on you and your feelings. Now let's look at another emotion and see whether that would still apply. Your joy and happiness. Is that the person that you meet in the streets that you think, well, I'm not joyful because they didn't make me joyful today? Or you switch on the television and you sit there going, well, they didn't make me smile and laugh, so that's their fault. Or, of course, the next one is a family member who you went to visit to cheer you up, but you weren't cheered up. They didn't make you happy. It seems a little strange, doesn't it, in that scenario, that you should kind of put the blame of your lack of joy and happiness on the person in front of you. And the reason for that, of course, is that they're your feelings. They're your emotions. It's your joy and your happiness. It's not theirs. People can inspire. They can instigate. They can even propagate their humour. And it can be contagious. And you can join in and feel part of that. But you still have to become part of that. That's your emotions. So the same thing's true, really, when you think about I'm offended. Now, is it an emotional response? Yes. Is it a objective response? Typically, no. Not when you simply break it down for what it is. An example could be like name calling. If I came up to you and said, you're a pink unicorn with an oak tree growing out your head that has ears and is singing Agadoo. Well, in our first scenario, that might make you laugh and find it quite humorous. But as for whether it would cause offence, I think you'd have to be very lightly triggered if that was to cause you offence, because it's basically nonsense. It's nonsensical, and it makes no meaning, purpose, or anything. I don't know how you could be offended by that. So if it's really abstract and obscure, then it probably won't offend you. And we're going to break that down in a moment. So let's come to the first point then. The first point of offence, and I have my notes in front of me, is what I call positional. Typically, especially when we look at the news and hear about people being offended today, it's normally from a positional point of view. And what I mean by that is who is right and who is wrong. My beliefs over your beliefs. A good example of that is that, and again, talking of the political spectrum of the left and the right, we're in a position now that things used to be quite clearly left or right-wing politics, and things would be in the centre, which is where typically most politicians and political parties have always played, in the centre ground. That way they get the best of both worlds. But now, especially among the sort of under 30s, left and right has just got very obscure and very confusing. And basically, it normally comes down to this one scenario, which is, if I consider my left and I hold a position on something, I believe a certain thing, fact to be true or not, even if it's not objective, it's just purely subjective, which position normally is. If you disagree with me, then your views are more right-wing than mine, then you are right-wing. Now, if we take that same person who was on the left and introduce them to another person who's actually more left, their views are even more extreme to the left, then effectively the person who was on the right, first of all, is now become extreme right, And the person who would have called themselves left is now right wing. So we keep hearing about everything is now right wing, and even mainstream media have adopted this same kind of language that anyone who doesn't agree with a particular narrative is right wing, and if they strongly disagree with a narrative, then they're extreme right wing. And we see this in the political world at the moment. Anyone that holds any traditional Christian values, or even more importantly, values the family, that family is important and the life of a child is important and husbands and wives are important and family should support each other and grow together and share in its views and direction, are now being considered right wing because they're not necessarily liberal minded and therefore anything goes. So that's positional. It's about your right versus my wrong, or my wrong versus your right. But when you look at it genuinely from an objective point of view, that's simply a difference of opinion. That is something that typically could be debated with free speech. But now even debate is being censored. So people are offended. Kind of makes sense. What's the second one? Well, the second one for me is what I call character. Character assassination. Now, character can be, you look at me and say, look, middle-aged man with a beard, balding, overweight. And if you said that to me out in the street, I'd just think you're observing the truth. You're seeing me. Now, if you put me next to a person who's 30 stone, I'm probably now the slim guy. Even more so, if they have alopecia, I'm described as the guy with hair, the slim guy with hair. Interesting again that it's not necessarily objective facts, it's more subjective. So the issue is whether I identify as a fat person or a thin person, or whether I should use body positivity to make me feel good. But in an objective word, if you literally ask a 4-year-old child to describe a person in front of you, whether they were thin or fat, I think they would lean towards a truth, which is I'm certainly not thin, therefore the alternative would be fat. Character is probably the one that people take most personal. It often is more to do with identity. So it's not just our superficial aspects of how we look on the outside. It can be to do with the kind of career you have. It can be to do with who you associate with. It can be your political values and views. It can be your faith in religion. It's the things that make you who you are. And we've already tackled the subject of identity. Now, of course, as a Christian, I would argue that if you are standing in your Christ identity, then really it doesn't matter what anyone says to you. These things are not so important because you're not taking the value of the person accusing you. You're taking the view of God and how God perceives you and how Jesus sees you in your new born-again Christian identity. But again, second biggest cause of offence is character assassination. Even more so since the time of Instagram in that is the fact that people who would probably objectively only rate themselves, well, they don't rate themselves, but objectively, from a beautifying perspective, only be somewhere between a 4 and a 6. They self-identify as a 10. And then when people reveal the truth to them, the objective truth, then of course it's offensive because their character identity has shifted. They are having to face something, which moves into my third point. And that third point is truth. Now, coming back to the second point, though, that whole thing about identity and character and how we're recognised by others being a threat, there is a biblical reference to that. And I'm just going to bring that up now. Unfortunately, I don't have my second screen at hand, so I can't refer to that. So I'm going to refer to Matthew 13:57, where he says, "So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honour except in his own country and in his own house." Now with Jesus, the same thing happened when he went to heal and preach. In his own town, he was rejected. And the reason he was rejected was simply because they knew him as Mary's son. They knew him as the boy of the carpenter. In other words, the character they identified him as was not who he was, but who they perceived him as, based on who he once was, in their eyes. But Jesus wasn't offended. He clearly stated that as a truth, that you cannot change people's perspective of you. It's simply something that we must accept. But at the same time, why were they offended? Well, because he spoke truth. And that's my third point. truth. Truth is offensive. Truth is probably the biggest offence today. So people are offended by truth. Again, let's come back to my scenario of that you were, I don't know, a pink unicorn with a tree growing out your head, singing Agadoo, etc. It's so farcical that it's just humorous. And if you're offended by that, then I think you need to go and see someone to get some sort of support, because it's not to be offensive if it's so, well, unrealistic. See, it could only be realistic if you were now to look at me and say, oh yes, but look, you're kind of a fat, unattractive, middle-aged man, and you know, I don't like your fashion sense and your shirt, and I don't like your videos. Well, again, whether they like my videos or not, that is their truth, and it is a truth. But the fact that they attach that to my physical appearance, which I can objectively actually recognise, and just for those who are out there concerned that I could be offended by that, I'm not offended by that. Why? Because I'm awesome. I know I'm awesome, and I'm absolutely, in God's eyes, I am perfect in the spirit. And I already know this. And again, when people come at me, it's not easy to be offended, because I only value the opinions of the people that I regard, those who are, you know, I look up to, those who share my values and morals, people that I would consider to be my heroes, people I am inspired by, and people that I respect. Anyone other than those people in that particular field, as I've described, well, it's just an opinion. Like Jesus, when he referred there to people that knew him as a boy, people in his own town, his own household. So no, but the truth, wrapped within lies, which of course we know is Satan's favourite trick, that will cause offence. Now, do I experience offence? Yes, I do. I was confronted just the other day with a text message from someone that I actually value. So how did I handle that? Well, I read the message again to make sure I'm reading it properly. And then what they stated in the message was a kind of accusation. So I then took that accusation and I simply ran it. I ran it through my reality and said, is this possible? Is this true? Is this a scenario? And if it is, can I do anything about it? Now, the first thing that stood out in that test was an actual fact that the person was not aware of the situation. In fact, it wasn't even third hand. It was simply a perception of something that they'd observed. Now, that person I've actually spoken to, and quite clearly they admitted that. They said actually when they read it, it probably came across more harsh than they meant, but actually they were just looking out for someone. And when I explained the truth of the situation, it was quite apparent that it wasn't meant the way it was supposed to be taken. And more importantly, though, it was not true. So if it's not true, then it shouldn't matter. But again, offence comes from within. So when we're accused of anything, we really should test it, because sometimes it really isn't our own perception that's causing our own offence. If there are truth in what's being said, then we should probably adjust what we're thinking and how we deal with it. So again, another piece of scripture I just want to quickly read. In Matthew 15:12, he says, "Then his disciples came and said to him, 'Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying?'" So they're referring to the fact that Jesus was talking to the Pharisees and they were offended. And as I say, the reason they were offended is because it was truth. When speaking the truth, sometimes the truth hurts. I think also sometimes people are happier in a delusion. I know we're in a world now that apparently we have fact checkers who are actually not even qualified or even authorised to give advice on what is truth. But these fact checkers supposedly support and defend what is a narrative of truth. But when you actually confront with the real truth, I think I've said this before, facts don't care about feelings. Facts have to be proven and tested and agreed by multiple sources, not simply certain kinds of people that are paid to have a particular opinion or give a particular view. We can't simply take 10% of 100 papers and say, well, these are the ones we select to be the truth. So from that position, let's just recap. We have positional, we have character, and we have truth. These are all factors that lead to being offended. But that offence is from within ourselves. We need to stand against that by simply growing and having faith in the Lord and trusting in our new born-again identity. But the truth is, Jesus said that we would be persecuted as Christians for that truth. I find it fascinating that that is also what allowed Christianity to grow in the world, is the fact that perhaps Christians were the least offended. But it's got to the point now in the world where, if anything, Christians are the only group that are now, well, targeted by comedians and other narratives and minority groups as being referred to hateful, right-wing, because, well, Christians had a truth that they believed in. And I say they had a truth because I noticed the majority of Christian organisations today, even some I've come across in my own locality, they are literally afraid to speak the gospel or to share the fact they're a Christian because they're worried about offending others. So let's just take stock of what I just said. As a Christian, we shouldn't be offended. We should recognise it's an emotion, and it's led by these three particular properties I've mentioned. So the truth offends. Jesus made that very clear. The truth will offend people. But the point is, the truth is also what sets us free. So if people are living in a false world narrative, if people are living a fake truth, then surely the role of a Christian is to simply reveal God's truth. What they do with that truth is up to them. They may take delight in the truth. Sharing the gospel and the good news, emphasis on good news, should actually fill them with joy when they see the revelation of what the truth is. But now we're in a time where churches are more concerned about offending people. So in other words, it's withdraw the truth and simply care more about how people feel. That's not dealing with offence. And again, if they're taking offence on them three properties we just said, should we always amend the truth and bend the truth? Is that really what being a Christian is about? So if you are a Christian in any particular church or denomination, or just simply in your own reality today, don't be afraid of sharing your truth. And when I say your truth, I mean God's truth. Make it personal though. Share it from the perspective of how you feel in life and perhaps how God intimately is involved in your reality. Sharing this with others is a way of showing people why you're not so easily offended. Christians are more tolerant than any other religion on the planet because we're not easily offended. But perhaps that's part of the truth message that we should be sharing. The truth is liberating, even if it causes offence. But remember, it is the truth that sets us free. God bless. If you were blessed by this video, why not give it a like? Also subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon to be notified of future videos.